When I was 8 years old, I watched my father drag himself across this very porch, bleeding from the ribs, shotgun still clutched in one hand, whispering my name through clenched teeth. The land had been under dispute back then, too. Different faces, different lies, but the same story: someone with money wanted our soil, and someone in town believed they could take it. That was the year my dad had to defend our eastern fence line from a land grabber who claimed he had rights over the water that ran through our lower pasture. Dad stood his ground. He won the case, but the stress killed him a year later. I buried him under the red oak on the ridge, right next to where he carved 1947 into the first cedar post of the fence he built by hand. My mother passed 2 years after that, and I left the ranch in my 20s, joined the army, went on deployment after deployment across continents, watching others defend borders while the one I was born to protect slowly faded from memory. I came back for good when I was 53. By then, the ranch was more bone than muscle, drought-scarred, earth-rusted wire. The barn slumped to one side like an old man after a fall. But it was still ours. No mortgage, no liens, just title and legacy. I cashed out my savings, retired from service, and poured everything I had into bringing it back to life. People said I was crazy for trying to restore a working ranch in the middle of an overdeveloped county. I didn't care. I wasn't here for the money. I was here because this land knew me. It remembered my first steps, my mother's laugh, the way my father sang hymns when he fixed the tractor. I owed it everything. And for a while, it gave me peace. I rebuilt the fence line with metal poles and concrete bases, added new gates, and dug in a solar well to revive the southern pasture. I bought a small herd of Angus and a couple of stubborn donkeys to ward off coyotes. Every morning, I'd make coffee, walk the perimeter with my mutt Jack, and thank God for the quiet. That quiet ended the day I found the envelope on my gate. It wasn't from the county. It wasn't from any court. It was from the Lakeside Horizon Homeowners Association, a group I had never joined, never spoken to, and had no intention of ever dealing with. Their logo was a stylized oak leaf over a cul-de-sac. The envelope had my name on it, but not my consent. Inside was a typed letter, 3 pages long, filled with legal-sounding gibberish and smug little phrases like, "Per the updated 2023 zoning corridor overlay, portions of your northern and eastern acreage now fall under HOA jurisdiction. As such, we will be reviewing compliance with community development standards, including shared access paths and visual uniformity along arterial borders." I reread that sentence 10 times. Then I looked at the map stapled to the back. They'd redrawn the boundaries. Literally. A thick green line now ran through my eastern pasture, the same pasture my father fenced off in 1975, the same one I'd cleared of mesquite by hand last spring, and marked it as proposed community access green space. Green space. They were trying to claim my land, without my permission, without due process, and worst of all, without warning. At first, I thought it had to be a mistake. Maybe a printer glitch. Maybe they sent it to the wrong address. But when I called the HOA office, a woman named Lynn answered and confirmed everything in a tone so polite it made my knuckles ache. "Yes, Mr. McAllister. The association board met last quarter and approved a plan for potential green corridor expansion. The parcel in question falls within our new overlay map, so we've added your name to the adjacent owner contact list. Nothing aggressive, of course. Just exploratory." Exploratory. She gave a breathy little laugh. "Don't worry. You'll still have access." I hung up without saying goodbye. For the first time in years, I didn't sleep that night. I sat on the porch in my flannel shotgun propped beside me like the old days, staring at the eastern fence line. The land was quiet, but something in me buzzed. I'd seen this tactic before, halfway across the world, people in suits with maps and ink claiming places they'd never stepped foot on. And now it was happening here again, just like when I was a boy. The next morning, I drove to the county clerk's office. The woman behind the counter knew me. Small-town courtesy still lived here. I asked for any updated records on my parcel. She tapped away, then frowned. "They filed a notice of pending boundary review," she said slowly. "But I don't see any approved rezoning. It's unofficial." "Can they do that?" I asked. She hesitated. "Not legally. But if they're loud enough and nobody pushes back, it might slide through. Especially if someone higher up owes a favor." The HOA had lied. There was no change in law, no ruling, just a bluff. But the more I asked around, the more I realized how deep their plan went. Two neighbors on the far edge of the HOA had already lost 5 feet of their backyard to a scenic path the board claimed was pre-approved. No warning, no payment, just flags in the dirt and surveyors with clipboards. This wasn't new. It was just my turn. I sat in the truck for nearly an hour that day, watching the traffic roll past the diner downtown. I'd served 26 years under 3 presidents, seen good men die in foreign lands, all because we believed in something called sovereignty. Now someone with a logo and a LinkedIn page wanted to erase mine with a map they made in PowerPoint. No, not this land. Not this time. They thought I was some quiet, lonely rancher with no fight left in him. But they forgot the blood that built this fence, and they had no idea what I was about to do next. I kept that envelope in the glove box of my truck as a reminder not of fear, but of clarity. You see, in the military, when someone hands you false intelligence, you don't ignore it. You mark it. You log who gave it, when they gave it, and who might benefit from it. Because a lie on paper is never just a lie. It's a step in someone's plan. And the faster you trace it, the faster you break it. So I started tracing. My first stop was the Planning and Zoning Commission. Lakeside Horizon, HOA, had claimed that a corridor overlay had been approved, something they could piggyback on. But when I met with the county records clerk, a sharp-eyed woman named Deborah, who'd been working that office longer than the HOA had even existed, she frowned as she scanned her monitor. "There's no overlay approved for that area, Mr. McAllister." I leaned forward. "Then what's this?" I showed her the map from the HOA letter with the green line cutting right through my eastern pasture. She laughed. Not a full laugh, just the kind you make when you see something audacious. "This," she said, "this is someone playing pretend with Adobe Illustrator." It wasn't just unofficial. It was completely fabricated. Deborah printed me the real county boundary map, current as of last quarter, with her certification seal. My land was clearly outside any municipal or HOA jurisdiction. Agricultural zoning, exempt from subdivision rules, and absolutely not part of their green space planning. I thanked her, then asked if anyone from the HOA had requested zoning adjustment meetings or permits. She shook her head. No formal requests, but... She clicked deeper into the system. They've submitted several public comment forms, including a push to add your parcel to the next planning phase. I asked to see the names. There were 3. Karen Holloway, HOA President. Brent Mullen, Real Estate Developer, recently added to the HOA Advisory Committee. And Natalie Graves, HOA Treasurer. And according to public property records, partial stakeholder in Mullen Design Group, the same firm that had just submitted a vision proposal for a new luxury development called Creekview Villas. I didn't need a full conspiracy board. The pieces were falling into place all on their own. Back at the ranch, I printed every document I had, spread them out on my kitchen table like battlefield schematics. There was only one way they could force anything to stick. They'd have to either fabricate public pressure or try to execute a compliance enforcement stunt, the HOA's favorite weapon. Sure enough, 3 days later, a notice was posted, not mailed directly to my fence post. Final compliance warning: unauthorized fencing and barriers obstructing proposed corridor. Failure to comply may result in community enforcement measures. There it was, a threat wrapped in HOA language. Community enforcement measures. I could guess what that meant. Bulldozers. Contractors pretending they were working under legal authority. Maybe even some off-duty security muscle to intimidate me into backing down. They weren't going to sue me. They were going to bully me fast and quiet. So I made my preparations. First, I contacted Charles Marston, my family attorney. "This is the kind of dirty play we used to see in land grabs out west," he said, skimming the notices. "We'll file for an emergency injunction, but you need evidence, James. If they come for your fence, you need it on camera. Every nail, every footprint." I nodded. Next, I called the sheriff's office. I didn't ask for a deputy. I asked for Sheriff Calvin Rourke, a man I'd served with 30 years ago in the Middle East, who owed me his life after a roadside bomb ambush in Fallujah. I wasn't here to call in favors, but I wanted him to hear the story himself. "Karen Holloway," he said over the line. "Yeah. Her name's come up before. She likes to play cop." I explained the documents, the lies, the likely breach. "You got video?" he asked. "I will. Then call me when it happens. I'll make sure it's your fence they rebuild, not your jail record they create." We hung up. I spent the next 2 nights installing hidden trail cams at every corner of the disputed property line. Not just wildlife cams, real high-definition motion-triggered cameras with audio. I angled them low, mid, and high. I even buried a microphone beneath one of the fence posts, right where I expected the bulldozers to come first. And I waited. It didn't take long. On a foggy Thursday morning, just after dawn, I heard the first low growl of diesel on gravel. I walked to the edge of my porch, mug in hand, and saw them 3 work trucks. 2 men in neon vests and a yellow Cat D3 bulldozer crawling toward my eastern gate like it belonged there. I knew the make, I knew the sound, and I knew in that moment that everything my father warned me about all those years ago when he showed me how to stretch barbed wire, how to set posts in lime, how to bleed for land that others called worthless. It was coming true again. One of the men hopped out and approached my gate with a clipboard. "Morning," he said casually. "We're here for the corridor clearance." I didn't move. "You're on private land." He nodded like it didn't matter. "HOA clearance. Got approval right here." I held up my phone. "I've got a camera recording right here. Step past that gate, and I'll call the sheriff." He smirked. "Go ahead." I did. I dialed Calvin directly. "They're here," I said. 3 trucks, 1 bulldozer, no warrant, no permits, claiming HOA clearance. Calvin's voice changed instantly. "Stay where you are. Do not confront. I'm on my way." But the man didn't wait. Before I even ended the call, he waved his partner forward, and the bulldozer lowered its blade. That was the moment I stepped down from my porch, shotgun in one hand, camera in the other, and stood directly in the dozer's path. I didn't raise the gun. Didn't even take the safety off. But I stared that man down until the engine stuttered. And that's when Karen showed up. In a tan SUV, mouth-tight, phone in hand, screeching to a halt like she was some kind of field commander. She pointed at me and screamed, "Call 911. He's threatening us with a weapon." The bulldozer roared. The workers froze, and I kept rolling, camera pointed, as I said calmly, "You're trespassing. And the only thing I'm threatening is a lawsuit." 5 minutes later, sirens echoed down the road. But they weren't coming for me. They were coming for them. Because I wasn't just standing on land. I was standing on truth. And this time, I had the whole damn thing on tape. The deputies pulled up with their lights off, calm, but alert, 2 patrol units from the county sheriff's office and 1 unmarked black SUV. And when the back door opened and Sheriff Calvin Rourke stepped out, hat in hand, everything on that gravel road shifted. He wasn't here for a noise complaint. He was here because I'd called him as a brother in arms. And because something about this whole HOA land seizure reeked of the kind of low-level corruption that slips between the cracks of small-town governance until someone shines a light on it. Karen was mid-rant when he approached, still standing next to her SUV, still holding her phone up like it was a badge of authority. One of the contractors was pointing toward me, gesturing like I'd threatened him with my shotgun, even though the barrel had never lifted an inch. I stood my ground, shotgun slung behind my back, arms crossed. The camera around my neck was still rolling. Calvin walked up to me first. "Colonel," he said. "Sheriff." He nodded at the dozer behind me. "Want to tell me what we're dealing with?" They crossed onto private land without a permit. Claimed HOA authorization. I've got recorded audio of the bulldozer operator admitting they're here under HOA orders. I've got footage of the equipment crossing my eastern boundary, which, as you know, hasn't moved in 76 years. He didn't blink. And the firearm. Never raised it. Never chambered around. Visible only for my own safety, same as I've done on this porch since the day I moved back. He looked me in the eye. There was trust between us, built not in courtrooms, but on sand and steel overseas. Then he turned to Karen. "Ma'am," he said evenly, "you want to explain why your people are tearing up someone's property without a county easement." Karen straightened her spine, lips tight. "We acted based on documented community expansion guidelines, Sheriff. This land is part of the Lakeside Corridor Integration Project, approved through our HOA zoning partners and verified with planning documents." Calvin raised an eyebrow. "You got those documents?" Yes, I submitted them to the board last month. But do you have county-stamped, filed documents showing this land belongs to your association?" She hesitated. "That process is underway." He turned slightly. "So no, you don't." Karen's tone got sharp. "Sheriff, this man has been obstructive, hostile." He waved a firearm at my crew. He stood on his land. Calvin cut in with a weapon holstered and pointed downward. "You brought heavy machinery across a fence that's older than your HOA. So unless you have something more than a PowerPoint presentation from a board meeting, I suggest you call your lawyer before I have to make this official." The look on her face, rage disguised as disbelief, would have been comical if it weren't so dangerous. "Fine," she spat. "We'll resolve this through legal channels." "No," I said. "You won't. because you already tried the illegal ones. I handed Calvin a printed packet, the one Charles and I had prepared just in case. Inside were county zoning maps with certified stamps, photos of my fence pre- and post-bulldozer, the letter from the HOA, audio transcriptions from the hired workers, the name Mullen Design Group circled in red. He skimmed the cover, flipped the first few pages. Mullen, these the folks trying to build that Creek View Villas project. I nodded. Guess who sits on their advisory board? Karen flinched. That was her first real tell. I continued. I cross-referenced their development proposal with county parcel maps. They'd need at least 12 acres to meet the buffer requirement for high-density housing. My pasture puts them at 15, just enough to qualify for luxury zoning. Which means, Calvin said slowly, they need your land. I nodded. And since they can't buy it, they tried to fabricate an easement through the HOA. The same HOA that, by the way, has never had jurisdiction over this parcel, never had my signature, and never filed a legal claim for annexation. Karen looked like a dam about to burst. This is outrageous. We were following policy. No, I said calmly. You were following a strategy. One built on fraud, deception, and the hope I'd be too old, too tired, or too poor to fight back. Calvin closed the folder. Ma'am, I'm going to need your crew to step off this property immediately. I'm also initiating a report for criminal trespass and property destruction. You and anyone associated with this unauthorized action may be subject to further investigation. Karen's mouth opened, then closed, then opened again. But nothing came out. The dozer operator didn't wait. He turned off the machine and walked back to his truck without a word. As they pulled away, dust trailing behind them like a retreating army, I watched Karen slam her car door so hard the SUV shook. But it wasn't over. Not yet. That night, I sat with Charles on the porch legal pad between us, outlining next steps. They faked jurisdiction, he said. We sue the HOA and anyone personally involved in directing the breach. That includes Karen and Mullen. Can we prove motive? We don't need to, he replied. We just need to show action without authority. And thanks to your cameras, we have everything we need. The rest is a matter of applying the right pressure financially, legally, and publicly. I looked across the pasture, the fence still standing strong under moonlight. My father's fence, my fence. They'd tried to erase it with a lie, but now I had the truth. And the map they'd drawn. It was about to become Exhibit A in the takedown they never saw coming. By dawn the next morning, my footage had already made the rounds. A neighbor's son who followed my YouTube channel, mostly ranch repair videos, and an old playlist of boot camp stories clipped the moment I stepped in front of the bulldozer and posted it with the caption, HOA tries to seize veterans ranch. This was his response. I hadn't even known he was filming from across the road. By lunchtime, the clip had over 40,000 views. Local news outlets started reaching out. But I didn't care about going viral. This wasn't about clicks. This was about principle. Charles filed the emergency injunction that morning. Karen and the HOA were officially blocked from conducting any further development actions on or adjacent to my property until the court reviewed the evidence. Calvin submitted his sheriff's report to the district attorney's office, including my footage and the statements from his responding deputies. But that didn't stop Karen, because people like her never stop with legal warnings. They escalate. That evening, just after I'd finished checking the western fence line, I heard another sound coming from the old service road near the lower pasture, this one smaller, more discreet. I followed it through the brush with Jack at my side and found two young men in reflective vests standing near my south boundary line. One of them held a large measuring wheel. The other had a clipboard and a printed map. When I stepped out from behind the trees, they jumped like they'd seen a ghost. You boys lost? I asked. They hesitated. No, sir. We were just confirming parcel dimensions for a project proposal. I crossed my arms. Whose proposal? The clipboard guy cleared his throat. We're subcontractors for Mullen Design. We were told this was common ground. It's private property, I said, and you just crossed a clearly marked fence line to stand on it. They looked at each other. I suggest you take your fancy wheels and your clipboard, turn around and tell whoever sent you that next time they're walking into a lawsuit with their name on it. They didn't argue. They backed out fast and didn't even stop to close the surveyor's bag. I took it, gave it to Charles. Inside were printed mock-ups of a 26-unit villa complex with private greenway access and shared lakefront privilege, all of which, according to the drawing, extended well past my property line. The standoff with the bulldozer wasn't a fluke. It was the first move, and the second was now in motion, incremental surveying, piecemeal map adjustments, soft legal gaslighting, all designed to wear me down. But they weren't the only ones preparing. I'd already called in favors of my own. The next day, a convoy of pickups rolled onto my land, friends, fellow vets, old 4-H dads, and local ranchers who'd heard the story and didn't ask for details. They brought fence posts, they brought cement, and they brought silence, the kind that builds stronger than noise ever could. We reinforced every border with steel pipe and razor wire, fully legal under Ag Use Code. We posted 18 new signs. Private property, trespassers will be prosecuted. Cameras active, no easement exists here. Charles printed a legal notice, laminated and zip-tied at every entrance. This land is the private tax-paying property of James R. McAllister. Any entry, without explicit written permission, constitutes criminal trespass and will be prosecuted. This parcel is not under HOA jurisdiction. 3 days passed. Then came the final escalation. Early one Saturday, I was feeding Ghost when I noticed a white SUV parked just outside the east gate. Not Karen's, new plates. A woman and a man in business casual stood by it with clipboards talking quietly. I approached the fence. They turned startled. The woman stepped forward. "Mr. McAllister." "Yes." "We're here on behalf of Creekview Horizons Partners. We're offering preemptive compensation in exchange for an access agreement that would allow pedestrian flow through the eastern corridor of your pasture. It's a generous offer." "How generous?" She handed me a folder. Inside was a check, $30,000. "For 15 acres, I said aloud. Less than $2,000 per. She smiled like it was a gift. I handed it back. "Tell your people I've already got offers for triple that to keep it exactly the way it is. And none of them involve lies, forged maps, or bulldozers." The man tried to cut in. "Mr. McAllister, this is an opportunity for community growth." "No," I snapped. "This was an ambush dressed up as urban planning, and now it's going to court." They left. That night, I posted a single photo to my small channel. It was just me standing in front of the reinforced east fence, with Ghost in the background, and the caption, "Not for sale, not for taking." The photo went viral. Again. But this time, reporters weren't the only ones watching. The state attorney general's office called Charles the next morning. Apparently, I wasn't the first landowner targeted by fake corridor expansions connected to HOA-backed developments, but I might be the first with enough evidence and enough fight to bring the entire game to light. The bulldozer had crossed more than a fence. It had crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed. 2 days after the survey crew incident, I got a call from Calvin. His voice was calm, but clipped, like he was reading a script through gritted teeth. "Just giving you a heads up," he said. "Karen Holloway filed an official police report this morning." I felt the heat rise behind my eyes. "What's she claiming now?" "She alleges that during the bulldozer standoff, you pointed a loaded firearm at her hired contractors and threatened them verbally." "I have the entire thing on video," I replied. "I know. I watched it myself. That's why I'm calling you instead of showing up with a cruiser. But be warned, she's also reached out to the county press office claiming you're a violent agitator trying to intimidate local officials. She's trying to flip the narrative. She's trying to bait you," he said bluntly. "Don't give her anything to work with." "I won't." But she wasn't done. That evening, just after sundown, I heard the sound of tires crunching gravel at the foot of my drive. Again. Only this time, it wasn't Karen. It was a county code enforcement vehicle, white and marked, with 2 young officers stepping out holding clipboards and an official-looking file. They stood near the gate like they were waiting for a door-to-door delivery, nervously checking the map and my fence line. I approached slowly, hands visible, Jack trotting beside me. "Evening, gentlemen," I called. "What brings you to the edge of the world?" The taller one adjusted his collar. "Sir, we've received a citizen complaint about an unpermitted livestock enclosure and a non-compliant fence structure within a potential shared easement zone." "Let me guess," I said. "Citizen's name starts with a K." He didn't answer. I pulled out the laminated copy of the injunction and held it up like a badge. "This is a court-ordered stay, barring any HOA or third-party interference with this property. That includes development code enforcement and so-called easement clarification tactics." The shorter one stepped back. "We're just documenting." I pointed at the edge of my gate, where my "no trespassing" sign stood under a trail camera. "You step 1 inch past that post and it's a separate legal violation." They left. Fast. The next morning it got worse. At 8:03 a.m., my phone buzzed with a call from Charles. James, he said without preamble, you're going to want to sit down. I'm already standing. Spit it out. She filed an emergency restraining order against you. I blinked. What? She claims you threatened her damaged HOA property and endangered public contractors with an unlicensed firearm. That's absurd. I know. But here's the kicker. She filed it in civil court under a temporary emergency statute for community safety concerns. She did it ex parte. You weren't notified in time to respond before the temporary order was granted. She got it. For 72 hours, he confirmed. You are legally barred from appearing at any HOA meeting, communicating with any board member, or approaching the property line adjoining Lakeside Horizon. I laughed. Loud. She wants to paint me as the aggressor now. She's trying to provoke a violation, Charles said. You so much as step foot within that shared creek area. Before we challenge the order, she can call 911 and make you out to be the trespasser. That's when it hit me. They weren't just trying to claim my land. They were trying to flip the script. Use the system. Make me the villain, so that every protective measure I took would seem hostile, unstable, and unlawful. They didn't care about justice. They cared about optics. That same afternoon, two things happened nearly simultaneously. First, a black SUV drove slowly down my main road, clearly filming. Not press, no markings, just tinted windows and a camera rig on the dashboard. Jack chased it halfway down the trail before it sped off. Then I got a call from Channel 9 News. Mr. McAllister, we've been told by a source inside the HOA that you've been using aggressive tactics to intimidate your neighbors and prevent community development. We'd like your side of the story before we air anything. I told them to come with cameras, bring their mics. I had plenty to show. By sundown, there was a news van parked beside my front porch, and I sat on the same rocker my dad built 40 years ago, looking into a camera lens like it was a rifle scope. I didn't raise my voice, didn't attack. I just told the truth. My name is James McAllister, I said, and I served this country for 26 years so I could come home to a piece of land my father died protecting. I didn't ask to be part of an HOA. I didn't join their meetings, sign their rules, or grant them access. They forged maps, misrepresented their authority, and sent machines across my land to tear down fences built with my family's blood. I held up the court injunction. The law is clear. The boundary is clear. And my camera footage is clearer still. I finished with one line, the same one that would later play on every local station that week. I didn't start this fight, but I won't back down from it either. Because what they're trying to take isn't just my land, it's the right to say no. The piece aired that night. By morning, the restraining order was under public scrutiny. A retired judge from 2 counties over wrote a letter to the editor condemning the weaponization of civil court to harass private property owners. It went viral online. And just like that, the narrative shifted again, this time in my favor. Karen had overplayed her hand. She thought calling 911 on me would win the sympathy war. But all she did was throw gasoline on the fire. The day after the restraining order blew up on local media, I sat in the diner off Route 12, halfway through a lukewarm cup of black coffee, when Sheriff Calvin Rourke slid into the booth across from me. No greeting. Just that familiar steel-eyed stare I'd seen back in Ramadi when a situation got murky. You stirred up a hornet's nest, he said. I nodded. Didn't start it. But I'm not about to get stung quietly. He reached into his vest pocket and pulled out a folded envelope, official seal, courthouse stamped. Just came from the judge, he said, sliding it across. Emergency restraining order vacated. Declared abusive in origin and likely retaliatory. The court wants Karen Holloway to appear for a review hearing. Your record's clean. I didn't smile. I just took the paper and tucked it into my chest pocket like a medal. Calvin leaned back and looked out the window. You know, when I first heard about this HOA versus rancher, I thought it was just a zoning squabble, but I've been digging. He turned back to me. And this runs deeper than your pasture. I raised an eyebrow. How deep? 2 other landowners near the northern edge of Lakeside Horizon filed complaints last year. Same tactics, same players. Attempted forced easement annexation through manipulated maps. They just didn't fight back the way you did. One sold. The other's still in probate after his widow couldn't prove the boundary shift was false. I stared at him. You saying Karen's been at this a while? I'm saying, Calvin said, she's not just a nosy neighbor with a gavel. She's part of a web that includes a property development scheme, potential wire fraud, and misuse of HOA authority. And you might have just kicked the door open on all of it. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. Then I said I need access to everything they've filed at the county. all correspondence. Every time Mullen Design and the HOA were in the same room. "You'll get it," he said. "In fact, I'll walk it in myself." And he did. By noon, I had 3 USB drives full of documents pulled under the Freedom of Information Act, showing email threads between HOA board members and the development company meeting, minutes marked informal, and even a draft proposal titled Creekview Phase 1 Expedited Subdivision via Adjacency Clause and Visual Buffer Claims. They'd written it like I was a technicality, a bump in the process. My land was referred to as undeveloped green margin, not a home, not a heritage, not even a person. Just a barrier to be moved. That night, Charles and I laid it all out. "They've been planning this for 2 years," he muttered, scanning through a chain of internal emails between Karen and Mullen's CFO. "They expected your fence to come down without a fight. The restraining order was the fallback in case you made noise. And now he said they're bleeding politically. Legally, it's about to get worse, because what none of them saw coming, what no one on that smug little HOA board ever anticipated, was the moment when the entire community, even those inside their own subdivision, would turn on them. That moment came on a Wednesday evening, 3 days after my interview aired. I got a knock at the door. It wasn't Calvin. It wasn't Press. It was Marcus Rivera, a father of 2, ex-paramedic and lifelong Lakeside resident. I remembered him vaguely from town council meetings. Never spoke much. Never stirred trouble. He had a manila envelope in his hand. "We've started a petition," he said, "for a full audit of the HOA. Financials, voting procedures, legal overreach. We're asking for a board-wide recall vote." I blinked. "Why bring this to me?" "Because you reminded us that community doesn't mean silence. It means responsibility. You defended your line. And now we're realizing Karen's been redrawing everyone's just slower, sneakier." Inside the envelope were 68 signatures, nearly half the neighborhood. By Friday, they had over 100. By Sunday, the HOA's own vice treasurer resigned. "I didn't know about the land stuff," she wrote in her email to the community. But I should have. I enabled it by staying quiet. That weekend, local media dubbed the situation the McAllister line. It wasn't just about ranch land anymore. It was about standing up when people tried to take something you didn't offer using maps, bureaucracy, and fear instead of guns. HOA meetings that used to draw a handful of retirees now had standing room only crowds. The HOA Facebook page, once full of potluck announcements, became a digital battlefield. One neighbor posted a clip of Karen at a previous board meeting saying, "If we don't move quickly, we'll miss the corridor funding window. The ranchers won't know what hit them until the signs are up." That went viral too. At the center of it all, I stayed quiet. I didn't grandstand. Didn't gloat. I fed my bulls, checked my fences, took calls from reporters, and passed them to Charles. Because it wasn't about me being right anymore. It was about them being wrong and held accountable. And when Calvin stopped by again, the following week this time, without a folder, without a warning, just a tired nod, I knew what he was going to say before he opened his mouth. "They're calling it now. County's opening a formal inquiry into HOA overreach. Mullen's project is frozen pending investigation, and the DA is quietly building a case." I poured him coffee. He looked out across the field. "Funny," he said, "how some people think a fence is just a fence." I nodded. "It's not." "No," he said. "It's a story. One you defended like a soldier. And maybe that's exactly what we all needed to see." The wind rolled over the ridge, and for the first time in months, I let myself breathe deep. Because the war for my land wasn't just being fought anymore. It was being won. You never expect the real smoking gun to come in a spreadsheet. It wasn't dramatic. No secret recording, no late-night confession. Just a perfectly ordinary Excel file, hidden in a trove of court-mandated disclosures from the HOA's internal email backups. We only found it because Charles had hired a part-time paralegal intern, a kid from the state university, to help comb through the files. The kid emailed Charles one line, "Hey, check tab 4, it's got something weird." Tab 4 was labeled Phase B Acquisition Cost Forecast. At first glance, it was numbers: parcel square footage, assessed value, projected acquisition date, estimated soft costs, and color-coded status bars marked secured pending or non-compliant. It looked like a routine planning doc for any housing development firm. But line 17 changed everything. Parcel 109C, McAllister Ranch, status non-compliant. Projected acquisition queue via easement pressure. Soft cost $30K legal buffer. And under notes, Karen to facilitate access post-fence removal. Expect pushback. use code enforcement and neighbor complaints to soften resistance. Charles and I sat in silence as he scrolled through it. Jesus, he muttered. They didn't just plan it, they budgeted for your defiance. They didn't just try to take my land. They counted on my resistance, planned around it, allocated funds to beat it, and listed me like I was a row in a profit and loss column. Worse, the spreadsheet listed 5 other parcels, all neighboring properties to mine, 3 of which had already been reclassified as secured through what they called amicable compliance. But I remembered what those neighbors told me, how they were pressured with vague fines, threatened with code violations for things like gutter slope or mailbox placement. One of them, a widow named Donna, who sold 2 acres last spring, had told me quietly I just couldn't deal with it anymore. This wasn't just about me. It was a deliberate land acquisition scheme run under the cover of HOA policy and backed by a private developer salivating over unspoiled ranch land just outside city limits. I called Calvin. He was quiet while I explained it. When I finished, I heard his chair creak through the phone. You still got that document? I've got copies. Send me everything. This might just be the link we needed for criminal conspiracy. That night, I printed out every page and drove to the local town hall. Not to cause a scene, to speak the truth publicly, directly, in front of the very people Karen once used to justify her expansion. The meeting room was full, standing room only, packed with residents, HOA members, a handful of news cameras, and more than one nervous-looking board member. Karen wasn't there. She knew better. I stepped up when my name was called. No notes, no slideshow, just my hands and my story. This isn't about offense, I said. It never was. I told them about the map, the bulldozers, the survey crew, the restraining order. I told them about the Phase B spreadsheet. Then I held it up and read the line about my ranch out loud, every word, every calculated phrase. When I finished, there was silence, then murmurs, then outright gasps. And when I turned to face them, I said, they wrote me down as a cost, as an obstacle, not as a neighbor, not as a citizen, and definitely not as a man who buried his father on that land. They thought they could budget my resistance, but they forgot one thing: I don't sell, I don't fold, and I sure as hell don't get softened by a fake HOA agenda wrapped in legal threats and bulldozer blades. Applause broke out before I even sat down. 3 days later, Karen Holloway was served with a subpoena. The HOA board held an emergency vote and placed her on indefinite suspension pending investigation. And the Mullen Design Group, they pulled their development application voluntarily, citing community feedback and unforeseen legal complications. But it wasn't over. Not for me. Not until every lie was exposed. The State Attorney General's office formally opened an inquiry into the HOA's financial practices. One of their auditors called Charles and said, "We've seen power-hungry boards before, but this is organized exploitation." And it wasn't just local anymore. National HOA watchdog groups picked up the story. I started getting emails from homeowners across the country. They did this to my dad in Nevada. He couldn't afford to fight. We were threatened with fines for putting up a privacy fence. They said it interrupted visual cohesion. Thank you for standing up. I thought I was alone. I answered as many as I could, because the truth is, this wasn't just about me anymore. It was about every person who ever got bullied behind closed doors by a group with a logo and too much time on their hands. It was about boundaries in every sense of the word. That week, I repainted my eastern gate. Not because it needed it, but because I wanted every brushstroke to remind me what I'd fought for. Over the arch, I carved the words my father once said after he rebuilt the fence in 1960. This line ain't just wood and wire. It's where we stop asking permission. They tried to budget me out. They failed. And now the entire state was watching them fold. The next HOA meeting didn't feel like a meeting. It felt like a trial, and this time, I wasn't the one on the stand. It took place in the Lakeside Horizon Clubhouse, a building that once hosted book clubs and holiday cookie exchanges. That night, it held more than 120 furious residents and a board on the edge of collapse. You could feel the temperature in the room before a word was spoken, the kind of anger that simmers just under the surface, kept quiet for too long by fear, apathy, or both. I stood in the back, arms crossed, not planning to speak. I had said what I needed to say at town hall. This time it was the neighbor's turn. Marcus Rivera stood first, the same man who brought me the petition. We all saw the spreadsheet, he said. We all read the Phase B plan. This board knew what they were doing. They planned it. They tried it on the McAllister Ranch. They tried it on Donna's property last year. And now we know they were going to keep trying. Applause followed. Not polite clapping. Real raw clapping, the kind that comes from people realizing they've been conned. Next was Eliza Pearson, mother of two, who once supported Karen's connectivity trail ideas. I bought my home because it backed up to green space, she said. I didn't realize that green space wasn't theirs to give. I didn't realize we were part of a plan to pressure a neighbor into losing land his family's owned for over 70 years. Her voice broke. I'm ashamed I ever backed this. Then came Raj, a retired engineer who had long sat silent in HOA meetings watching the games from behind his glasses. I was on the budget subcommittee, he said. I raised questions last year when I saw line items labeled boundary acquisition prep and easement compliance enforcement. I was told it was part of the landscaping budget. Laughter, bitter, furious. One by one, neighbors stood and laid down testimony not in court, but in the court of public reckoning. By the time the mic passed to Sheila Blake, the secretary who had resigned 3 weeks earlier, the room was electric. She took a deep breath. I knew, she said, not everything, but enough. I saw Karen pressuring board members to sign documents without review. I saw her coaching contractors on how to enter land without written consent, telling them we'd clean up the paperwork later. People gasped. No one interrupted. I stayed silent because I thought it would blow over, she said. I thought it wasn't my fight, but silence is complicity. And I'll carry that mistake with me for a long time. Someone shouted from the back, at least you told the truth. And that's when it happened. Someone moved to call a vote of no confidence, not just against Karen, but against the entire board. Normally, it would have taken weeks, months even. But the HOA bylaws, the very ones Karen had once weaponized, also included a clause for emergency restructuring in cases of suspected fraud or legal liability. And tonight, the evidence was stacked higher than her resume. The vote passed 83-9. Karen wasn't there. She hadn't shown her face in public since being served the subpoena, but the effect of her reign still rippled. By the end of the meeting, a temporary steering committee had been elected volunteers who promised transparency, third-party audits, and an immediate freeze on all development partnerships. One of them approached me afterward, a man named Julio, soft-spoken, probably 10 years younger than me, with calloused hands and eyes that understood the weight of land. I never voted before, he said. I thought it didn't matter. I'm sorry it took so long. I shook his hand. It's never too late to stand up. But the fallout didn't stop at the neighborhood line. The story had legs now. Statewide HOA oversight groups began posting about it. Local news was replaced by regional outlets and then by a segment on national television titled When the HOA Goes Too Far, One Rancher's Stand. It opened with drone footage of my land, the fence line glinting in the afternoon sun, the bulls grazing behind reinforced steel posts, the sign on the gate reading, "Not for sale, not for taking." I didn't do interviews anymore. I didn't need to. The story spoke for itself now. And behind the scenes, the legal wheels were turning. Charles confirmed that. The district attorney's office had begun interviewing former HOA board members, some willing, some subpoenaed, to determine whether criminal charges were warranted under state racketeering statutes for collusion between a public board and a private developer. They had everything they needed. The spreadsheet, the emails, the forged corridor map, the financial trail from HOA dues to Karen's personal account, courtesy of a tip from a resigned treasurer. And then the tipping point came. A whistleblower, a former assistant to the Mullen Design Group, came forward with a signed statement. He had audio of a closed-door meeting where Karen said, once the old guy gives in, the rest will follow. He doesn't have the money or the health to fight. One good code violation will break him. The DA's office froze Karen's assets that week. She was arrested 2 days later, charged with conspiracy to commit fraud, unlawful use of public authority, and attempted theft of real property. She was let out of her house in cuffs. The image hit the front page of the local paper the next morning, the same paper that had once featured her ribbon-cutting a butterfly garden with the mayor. Not a soul came to defend her. Even her lawyer jumped ship 2 days later. And me, I stayed home, watched the wind roll over the pasture, listened to the bulls shuffle through fresh hay. And finally, for the first time in what felt like a year, I slept through the night with both doors unlocked. The day Karen Holloway was formally indicted, the phone calls began at dawn. Not reporters this time, not neighbors, lawyers from across the state, from neighboring states, from people I'd never met, ranchers, landowners, HOA watchdog groups, all calling to say the same thing in different ways. We've been waiting for someone to crack this open. One man from Arizona, voice rough with age, told me his brother had lost a family farm. To a similar tactic, easement, pressure, fake maps, threat letters until the man just walked away. Another woman from Missouri said her HOA threatened to fine her daily unless she allowed visual buffer access through her orchard for a walking trail no one ever walked. All of them had been bullied, and all of them saw in my story something that felt like justice finally catching up. Charles was inundated. His inbox hit capacity twice in 1 week. He took calls from state attorneys general, from legal advocacy networks, even a team from a nonprofit that investigates municipal-level fraud. And through it all, the case against Karen, and by extension the entire Lakeside Horizon HOA, snowballed. The charges weren't minor. They included conspiracy to commit fraud, tampering with county property records, misuse of HOA funds, abuse of authority for personal financial gain, false reporting to law enforcement, attempted unlawful seizure of private land. Add to that the pending civil suit I'd filed, and Karen was facing enough legal firepower to make a seasoned lobbyist sweat. Her mugshot was plastered across every news station in the region. No sunglasses, no blazer, just the raw, unfiltered image of someone who had been powerful too long and pushed too far. And while the world watched her fall, something else was happening quietly, something Charles had warned me about. The HOA board tried to distance itself. They issued a statement. The actions taken by Ms. Holloway do not reflect the values of the Lakeside Horizon HOA or its community. They offered to settle the civil case. Quickly, they offered money $100,000. Charles presented the offer, sliding the document across the table one evening after dinner. I stared at it. Tempted, he asked. I shook my head. Not even a little. He grinned. Didn't think so. I didn't want their hush money. I didn't want some payout that let them wipe their hands clean and move on. I wanted something they couldn't buy back. So I wrote my own counteroffer. It had 4 demands. Full admission of wrongdoing printed in the HOA's newsletter, emailed to every resident, and read aloud at the next board meeting. Restitution, not just for me, but for every homeowner who had been fined, threatened, or harassed under false pretenses during Karen's tenure, with amounts to be reviewed by an independent auditor. A mandatory restructuring of the HOA, with outside oversight for 2 years, ensuring transparency, open meetings, and regular financial reporting. And last, the one that mattered most to me, a permanent deed restriction filed with the county, sealing my property's boundaries against any future HOA inclusion, annexation, or access easement of any kind forever. Charles submitted the offer. We waited. They folded in 48 hours. The HOA accepted every term. They'd seen the writing on the wall. The DA's office wasn't just going after Karen. They were reviewing the entire board's conduct, the developers' backroom deals, and the county officials who looked the other way. By the end of the week, 2 more resignations hit the HOA roster. And on a quiet Thursday morning, a landscaping truck pulled up to my eastern gate. A crew got out, installed a brand new county-recorded boundary marker cemented into bedrock. Stainless steel, tamper-proof. Then they planted a 6-foot cedar sign behind it with laser-etched letters that read, "Property line legally recognized permanent boundary. McAllister Ranch, Esther, 1906. Unincorporated, untouchable, unbroken." When I walked out and stood next to it, one of the workers, a younger man with calloused hands and a ball cap, offered a small smile. "My uncle showed me the video of you standing in front of that dozer," he said. He cried. Said it reminded him of when his own dad got run off his land by a rail company. He paused. "Thank you." I didn't know what to say, so I just nodded. Later that day, the county clerk emailed Charles confirmation that the deed restriction was approved and finalized. My land was sealed. My father's fence, my grandfather's soil, it would never again be a pawn in someone's spreadsheet. That night, under a sky filled with stars, clearer than I remembered, I walked out to the edge of the field with Jack trotting beside me. Ghost and the other bulls slept peacefully in the distance. I reached down, touched the boundary marker. Cold, solid, real. And for the first time in almost a year, I whispered something I hadn't dared to say out loud. It's over. But it wasn't just an ending. It was a beginning. Because what started on a ranch fence, a fight no one thought an old soldier could win, had become something larger. A message, a warning, and I hoped a spark. The land was quiet again. Not empty. Never that. Just quiet in the way it had been before the letters, before the bulldozers, before the fake maps and the cameras, and the courtroom whispers. The kind of quiet that sinks into your bones and reminds you that you belong where you stand. That what was nearly taken has not only been returned, but restored. I woke that final morning with no press at the gate, no code enforcers circling in their white trucks, no HOA newsletter filled with threats disguised as friendly reminders. Just the sound of the dew sliding off the porch railing and the bulls grunting lazily near the creek bed. Ghost lifted his head as I approached the fence. He'd aged a little through it all like me. A few more scars from the chaos, nothing you'd see unless you knew what to look for. But his eyes were calm, unbothered. The eyes of an animal that had defended what was his, and now got to enjoy what remained. I ran my fingers along the fresh, barbed wire. Each knot perfect, each post sunken deep into concrete. Volunteers had come to help rebuild it, neighbors, fellow ranchers, even folks from 2 towns over who showed up after seeing the story on the news. One man, a quiet fellow named Andrew, maybe 40 flannel shirt tucked neatly into his jeans, had said something I still haven't forgotten. He was pounding in a corner post when he looked up and said, "You didn't just win this for yourself. You showed people we don't have to be polite when we're being stolen from." We'd all nodded, because we knew exactly what he meant. The final settlement from the civil suit arrived that week, not in the form of cash. I declined monetary damages beyond legal fees, but as something far more satisfying: public reform. Lakeside Horizon HOA was placed under 2 years of third-party oversight. Their bylaws were rewritten with county input, and any future development within a mile of unincorporated property required notarized consent from the owner. Not just notice, not just advisory invitations. Real, binding consent. They also had to publish a formal community apology statement. It ran on the front page of the HOA website, in the local paper, and in 3 mailed flyers. We acknowledge that under the leadership of former President Karen Holloway, the HOA overstepped its legal authority in attempts to annex and alter the land surrounding the McAllister property. These actions were undertaken without valid jurisdiction and were part of a broader scheme that resulted in legal violations. We apologize to Mr. McAllister and the surrounding community for the harm caused. No spin, no euphemisms, just the truth. The day the apology arrived in the mail, I burned the original HOA letter, the one that claimed they shared jurisdiction over my land. I watched it curl and blacken in the same rusted barrel my father once used to burn fence stumps. Some ghosts deserve fire. Karen never showed her face again. She pled out admitted guilt on 3 counts, surrendered her role in all future property associations, and received 5 years probation plus 1,000 hours of community service. The developers behind Mullen Design Group were investigated separately. 2 were fined heavily. 1 lost his license entirely. And the land stayed mine. I walk it now in the late evenings, Jack bounding ahead, his ears flicking at every rabbit in the brush. The bulls watch me from their ridge silhouettes against the amber sky. And I carry no weapon. Not because I trust people more, but because the land no longer needs protection in the same way. It has presence now. It has history. A boundary once challenged, now reinforced by court rulings, camera footage, and something far stronger than steel or concrete. Community memory. No one in this county will forget what happened here. Not the day the bulldozer came. Not the moment I stepped in front of it. Not the look on Karen Holloway's face when she realized the man in her way wasn't going to blink. I didn't win because I was the loudest. I won because I knew where the line was, and I refused to let anyone move it but me. On the gatepost now beside the original cedar sign my father carved in '76, I added a new plaque. It's small, quiet, but I see it every morning, and I hope others do too. Boundaries are not barriers. They are declarations of care. The land taught me that. So did the fight. And if there's one thing I hope lives on after me, long after the bulls have passed and the fence has faded, it's this. No one has the right to redraw the lines of your life without your say. No HOA, no board, no paper trail filled with lies. If your legacy is worth anything, it's worth defending. Even if you have to do it with nothing but your boots in the dirt, your back to the wind, and the truth burning like fire in your chest. I didn't just get my ranch back. I got my name back, and I wrote it into the soil for good.